How's everyone enjoying the fact that we have a conference about this crazy little tool? There we go. Wow, it worked vaguely first time. Yeah, you can see nothing with these lights. That's really good. Hello, glowing orbs in the sky, and I assume no one. Who am I? Oh no, I have to turn it on. What madness. Yes. Hello, I'm Ben Hughes. I'm Barn on Slack, probably on like 1,600 different Slacks, because that's how they make money. I'm currently at Stripe. I used to be at Etsy. Before that, I was at Puppet, which proves even these big companies will hire anyone. I have my first commitment in Osquery, so when it breaks, blame me. And I did once wear Mike's pants to work because he left them when he left Etsy, which I don't have a picture of, sadly. This talk, for a reason I really can't justify, has a number of Phil Collins and Genesis references, so that's kind of a trigger warning if you grew up in the 80s. I might talk a bit about Osquery and some stuff on endpoint visibility. Otherwise, they wouldn't let me talk. So mostly Macs is what I've historically worked on because Windows is now terrifying as I haven't used it in 10 years. And I stopped having a Linux desktop when I should have. Actually, probably arguably later. But Gen 2 on a G3 iBook is not a good day. But Macs are actually next step boxes, which is why all the error codes start NS, which is something I never stop finding amusing. In a parallel universe, they're BIOS, so it could have been worse. Because Steve Jobs didn't work for BIOS, blah, blah, blah. But your OS is basically something from the 90s, so it doesn't have avocado toast. And so endpoint detection, like on Windows, there's been a bunch of commercial tools since the dawn of time. On Linux, there hasn't been because no one had desktops on Linux, and if they did, they're not installing any of your crap. Or they will only work on CENT 6 or something, naming no vendors specifically. Facebook, who seem to be coming up a lot for some reason, no idea why, did a talk, Mindframe did a talk in 2012, back when we were away. It was a really good talk. It was at RoxCon in Australia, in Melbourne. I recommend going if you can just get to Melbourne. There's actually good coffee there. It's weird. Come at me, San Franciscans. And there's, at the beginning of the talk, a lot about AppSec and all that good stuff that I had no idea about. And then they got to a bit on like looking after their Macs. As they have quite a few laptops at Facebook. I believe like at least one each. Which is just a more convenient way to work. More companies should do that. But they had no real visibility into them. So a Big Mac was kind of shown in this talk, and here's the slides. Or one of the slides. I'm going to show all the slides. Wouldn't that be amazing? Someone else's talk just segued into the middle of mine. Why did I write all this? I could have got away with it. And yeah, there's a bunch of reasonably familiar looking things here, stuff you kind of want, like special sauce, lettuce, and cheese. I'm sure it made sense at the time. But this was 5 years ago. But like, does this look like anything? Anyone seen anything like this before? Who knows? And this is what they were kind of getting at, of putting all their log data into a database and then querying it like this. And it seems like in a few years they just went, why don't we just skip that middle bit? Meanwhile, I was at Etsy. There's a wonderful photo of the Etsy security team back in the early 1800s. Many of those have gone to bigger and better things, and I've changed my hair color. So back in 2013, we were looking to make our own version, because I think by law you have to. The same way you had to write a script that could reverse DNS in Perl, and also, what's the other script everyone has to write? Oh, the one for going through GitHub to see if all your stuff's been compromised. There's both traditional rites of passage in any new job where you didn't copy it from the previous one. So we, got in a bunch of rooms, wrote in some whiteboards, and then got to making our own terrible version of a bunch of scripts hacked together with some glue, or commercial products as they're known. And we went for the standard development practices of Mike holding up in his apartment, just sitting there typing code until one was produced. And we were like, wow. Because it's standard development practices, I'm really glad Mike's got better at commit messages. Because for my entire time at ETSU, I cursed your name for these commit messages. Looking out for you. And if there's any ETSU lawyers in the room, I have no idea where this information came from. This is not from a repository I've never seen. You'll never take me alive. So, project name is born. I don't know if I'm still under NDA or anything like that. I think ETSU have stopped using it, so I figure I'm fine dropping Ode. But we had this project. Who cares what it's called? You can ask me about the joke later. Actually, I think we've spoken about it.
Yeah, we've talked.
Yeah, okay. It was called Trip Yarn, after Tripwire, but it was yarn because everything at ETSU had to be made of yarn or knitted or, our naming schemes are on the money. But it was Python-based because working in the security industry, you have to write Python because it's technically correct. Now Go has that, where you can't do JSON. Without using that website that turns it into a struct, no one's ever made JSON without that. Modular, which makes sense. A persistence data store, SQLite, more from them later. And it looked a disk, which then went off to Splunk because it was pre-OPI startup times, and we were just setting fire to money and all that kind of stuff at ETSU. But as it progressed, we got some really cool capabilities out of it, and it was actually pretty good. And then time passes a bit. Facebook, them again, rock up, and we decided to release kind of this framework to the, I was going to say undeserving public, but that's really condescending. To open source it, as ETSU is caring, loving, hugging company. Open sourcing things is generally a thing we like to do. I know nothing else with open source, but it was a long time ago. And a lightweight, scalable solution. Again, sounds familiar. We released it publicly. It got a little bit tiny nerfed in its functionality, as in all of the guts were ripped out. And we got rave reviews on Hacker News. But that person's since been deleted, so how useful are they? Then we had some changes in the ETSU security team. Mike went to this tiny startup called Instagram. No, I don't know if they've been bought then. Zane went to start Signal Sciences, who are great. Next generation web application firewall. I said it without laughing. Who are doing awesome things. I try not to take it too personally that the entire team left on me. Luckily, I have really good self-esteem, or that would be a problem. So 2014, Rich Smith, who now works for Duo, heading up a bunch of the security stuff, adds a build system. We improve its capabilities, we make it more rootkit-like, because that's fundamentally what everything like this is. Compromising someone's laptop and installing Carbon Black would be amazing. You would get all their passwords really quickly. But it's thankfully financially expensive. But it's still written in Python. The whole thing was written in Python. It was just then a big executable wrapped with PyInstaller and all this good stuff. All the evasion techniques that we learned in the 90s are now being applied to real jobs in the 2010s. Oh, that was dumb. So I became the the overprotective maintainer of it, which is a fairly accurate title. I was doing most of the work in its upkeep. I was sadly the only person who knew how to build the thing on my laptop because there was no way to build it anywhere else. I like how Osquery does that by installing a new laptop on your machine when you try and build it. You're like, oh yeah, that works. So yeah, I was giving it all the care, watering, and attention I thought it needed. But anyway, a bunch of us from ETSU who were based in New York, so they were visiting San Francisco, went down to the Facebook towers. We had to meet the security team there, met up with some cool people, had some probably good food, it's Facebook. Saw the Disneyland Castle, all that kind of stuff. But then we got talking to Mike, and this is the only surviving photo of Mike that day. He didn't know I still had this, but yeah. And this is him talking about the kind of plans for this this ridiculous thing he was bringing up, and it was like endpoints and C++ and other words in a word cloud because we're cool, and all this kind of jazz. It sounded really cool, but it sounded kind of madcap in a way, and also really built for Facebook. If you've ever used I'm just going to get in more trouble. If you've ever used any of Google's open source things, you're like, this will work perfectly in my infrastructure if I was Google. But because I don't have my own GCP or App Engine or Bigtable, it's kind of lacking. It's the way it was. It wasn't Bill Gates saying it. Get it right. It's the 8 and 16-bit architecture of the IBM XT. But I made a collection of dumb statements, as you can see from the talk thus far, I'm prone to. Facebook, they had a whole floor of analysts. They were like a 2-3 billion person company then, whatever. And their job was just to go through all the like GFIR data and go attack, not attack, or I don't know. I haven't had a job like that in a long time. But we don't have any, as we're a knitting startup. So, so we've got some people who know Python. So we're going to write our stuff in Python, because we don't have anyone who really knows SQL. Yeah, but the whole push-pull model, our like persistent rootkit on disk would find stuff and then generate alerts out, whereas this would be, I want to go looking for things, and you're like, well, what if I forget to go looking for compromise? And I won't get it. And then, like the moderately reasonable, but slightly not invented here. We had something that was working enough, as I'm sure everyone did when they had their collection of bash scripts or Python scripts or Lua scripts or some corn shell. So what kind of happened is we went away, did our own things, moved on with our lives, got real jobs. Yeah, that's how Midas went. This is from the ETSU GitHub repo. This is how Osquery went. I'm sorry if there's a better award I should have used, but this was the most like impact. And this is the O'Reilly one, but whatever. So I was completely wrong. Like, this is one of the things I've been the most wrong about in my career, and there is a list. Going back to Chris's talk, I took out one of our Naggy Us servers with audit-D by merely making the load average 400. So be really careful when using audit-D on Naggy Us servers. Also be really careful when using Naggy Us. So yeah, I was super wrong. Like, pride comes before a fall, etc. So you might be asking, why are we listening to you, Ben? You've got a proven track record of being wrong. And I do stand between you and lunch, which is another good thing to be questioning. But it's like, I wanted to show that you could be wrong and admit that in this industry, because InfoSec is awful, and like ego-driven and horrible and all these things, and software development where you can get very proud, as clearly I try to be, on other people's code. Let's not forget that. But it's helpful to admit when you're wrong, and as I've become a gnarly old person, Being able to admit that has actually been really nice for me. Or as that jerk was saying earlier, it's good to say I don't know to things, and I've actually been enjoying that more. Because it's kind of liberating, and you can be like, I don't know, but I want to learn, rather than I have this big pride thing I need to maintain, blah, blah, blah. Don't get too attached to your code. I'm not a developer, I'm barely a programmer. When I was a wee child, back in 2,000 years ago, one of the many jobs other than like fire truck or majorette that I wanted was to be a computer programmer. And then once I started programming, I went, no, that isn't the job I want. I'm awful at this. So I'm not a developer, but I still do get attached to my code. And like, code you write is different. Being proud of the code you write is different to that code holding you. Never be afraid to like delete all your code and start again, which is, I think, what that links to. And I just wasn't prepared to do that. I had this thing that I worked on and was like, yeah, this is cool and does these things. But if I had not done that, then it would have moved ETSU's, I think, transition to Osquery forward by like 2 years. Which, you know, plus and minuses, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, back to the plot. I guess this is somewhat self-indulgent. This isn't Ben sulking con. This is Ben sulking con. Which is just an amazing piece of ego on my part. I just couldn't help it. So Osquery. Does anyone know how to capitalize Osquery other than Mike? Because, yeah. So I left ETSU. That's where the Phil Collins references start. Be careful. I went to Stripe. I've been there a year and change. They still haven't quite figured it out. And like a couple of things at Stripe, we're not running the bleeding edge version. A year ago, this is the version we were running. I didn't want to look up what version was actually released around that time, as it would probably make me sad. So it wasn't the latest possible version it could be. We had Doorman, one of the worst of the X-Men, who's able to just turn into a door at any moment. Still better than Cyclops. So, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Doorman from either the Marvel comics or possibly its affiliation with Osquery. One of the few kind of like, well, there's a handful now of cool endpoints. It's useful, it's really easy to get going, it's persistent backend, so queries that don't happen then will eventually be tracked down. From looking at it, it's written in Python, so thus is technically correct. It has like a solid architecture. From looking at it, it's also written by a Python developer, so it looks like it's written by a Python developer. Like everything at Stripe, it's a custom fork version that we had to add our own stuff to and maybe backport it, who knows. And we could only access it over SSH port forwarding for long, complicated Stripe reasons that we don't need to bore ourselves with. So that's when Collide's Fleet, or Collide as it was kind of known then, in some weird like eponymous release before your difficult second SaaS album. It was like paid licenses for hosts, but it turns out if you can just like message the co-founder and they tell you they're about to open source it, you can probably get a license cheaper than that. So how does Fleet work? Well, this is the diagram. Still better than Audit D. Yeah, much better than Audit D. So how does Fleet work? But like, if you've used Fleet or looked at its GitHub page, this is what it looks like. It presents your host in a nice, fantastic way. Good old paid designers, etc., etc. So I was, I'm an unpaid shill. So then what do you do with that? Well, start throwing it all away by using logs, which is where data goes to die. So like anything designed, despite being in Go, it spits out JSON. I imagine it just pipes it to a Ruby or Python process to do that. Protobufs out, pipe. Ruby minus E. Yeah, I get it. Which means you can feed it into pretty much anything that accepts JSON, so no other Golang application. I will get off the Golang thing, really, really. So we use Elk. Elk is free. If your time is also free. We use a mixture of Elk and Splunk at Stripe. Like many companies do the same. I'm not here for the Holy War, but I will be outside for the Holy War. So you can catch me anywhere for that. Yeah, they both have their benefits. But we were using Collide for a while. We've got like hundreds of hosts in it, and we were missing the deltas on the differential changes, which are kind of a key bit. Like, this machine has just been compromised. How? Yep, definitely how. Can you tell me what with? Nope, no, sorry. So this went on for far too long because I'm terrible at debugging, as well as programming. Why hire me? No. So we were like TCP dumping the network traffic, cutting and pasting that output into other things. Was running debug releases. I was adding more printfs because that definitely helps you find bugs, because REPLs. And then we found log results events. For us, log results events were set to false because of the Doorman installation that we had from back when Stripe was money, because credit cards hadn't been invented yet, which is how old it was. Yeah, it's a thinker, but don't worry. Victor was super helpful in debugging that and giving me wild test releases and ideas of, it might be this. But eventually, once we start setting it to log results to true, it started working. And now Fleet supports both, because Victor then just went and wrote a patch, because he's a machine. So we started getting like log information rather than just, we found a thing, not going to tell you what it is, which make a really terrible freemium model. Like pay per compromise. So now we have thousands of endpoints, multiple platforms, still no Windows. Phase rollouts thanks to Monkey, also written in Python, so it must be correct. Lots of exciting queries. And like throw your hand in the air or make a strange noise. If you've learned more about SQL from Osquery than you have working in the industry your entire career. Like, yeah, I took a databases class back in the Stone Ages when I went to college, or whatever it's called here. And like I've learned more in the past year of using Osquery than I have in the 20 years of my career thus far. So, you know, wrong tool for the job. Okay, you're all hungry, I'm starving. Clearly, breakfast wasn't enough. Don't worry, we can get out of this. We can just drop the ending. Subtle. So InfoSec in the security industry isn't good at keeping ego under check, so I'll see you all in Vegas later this year. For Exhibit A. I would like that not to be the case, and I think we can be careful with that pride. Learn from my mistakes, because then you have a lot of learning to do. This is a really pithy statement I made up, and it's more or less a Fight Club reference, so that's fine. But I think, and I'm currently doing this in another project, so I need to be aware that I'm doing this and try not to do this. Because it's very easy to just like dig in your own to code and making this one thing and then letting no one else in because this is all your stuff and you know how it all works. But that isn't what you're, that isn't healthy to do, and it probably isn't what you're paid to do. It's just human lizard brains are terrible. Apparently I have to talk about community, as everyone has so far. So it's lucky I put the slide in. Like everyone in the Osquery space is doing really interesting things. There's a bunch of there's commercial stuff, there's open source stuff, and it's actually nice to be in a community where everyone's really helpful and there's no known people who you just have to avoid because they write the Linux kernel. And it's really nice to have a security tool that you don't actively hate. There's about 4 of them in the entire industry. Duo is one of them, and then Osquery is another one, and then you start going, I'm sure there are others. And like all the maintainers, that joke earlier was saying, it's like a very small core team, but they've been super helpful both on the GitHub pull requests and the issues and on Slack. So thankful to them. Thank you to all the contributors and people who hang out on Slack or idle on Slack, because that's what we have to do now. So I have some time left. Let's do a lunch. And that is my last Genesis slide. I'm pretty easy to find, barn on most things. There's stuff in there. I throw these slides up on the internets, or I'll send out a link to them. So you can click on all the links and find all the Easter eggs. That's pretty much the only useful thing in them. Cool. I can take questions, but like, what is that a question, really? Thank you.